Welcome to Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan. This is our first show for the new year, so Happy New Year. Our featured guest today is Cary Brown, who is the Executive Director of the Commission on Women. Welcome, Cary.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always great to be here.
We just adore having you. You're such a wealth of information, and what you're doing for the state commissioners is just absolutely vital to keeping, Vermont women and others, open to what's going on and resources. So I want to thank you. What I like you to do, if you don't mind, I know that you just completed another appointment. If you would just fill us in on what that was and what it was all about, and will that position continue to go, or just give us a little bit of background so our audience can understand a little bit more about you.
Sure, yeah. So this was the Governor's Workforce Equity and Diversity Council, and this is a group that is established by executive order by the governor, and the whole point of the group is to provide like some advice and guidance to the administration on workforce matters of equity and diversity. And so that group comes up with the Equal Employment Opportunity Plan every year and monitors different actions that the state is taking to try to have our workforce be diverse and equitable. And so that's a group that I am part of still. But what I just completed was a term as a co-chair, and that just finished up like last month. But I'm still on that council. So I'm still part of that group. And that
So
group
is it a council? Is it a council? Is it a board? Is it an independent agency?
Yeah, it's called a council. I don't know if there's an official,
Sure.
legal definition for that or anything.
I'll find one, right?
Yeah. and it's different from a board or a commission in that it is created by executive order, and so it's kind of under the umbrella of the governor's office, and it consists of both state employees and members of the general public, and there's a whole list of categories of members, so that to make sure that different groups are covered. And so this group looks at kind of tries to respond to what's actually going on and with the state workforce, but also to make recommendations for how to make things better. And we work very closely with the Department of Human Resources. They're part of that council as well. And then there's representatives from the Department of Labor and from people from the general public. So there's someone who represents LGBTQ, someone who represents folks with disabilities, and we try to have kind of a comprehensive look at how to make sure that the state is a good place to work is basically, the gist of it. That the state is a good employer.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, because it sounds to me now, from hearing about it, that it is a strong mix of what's going on operationally and with labor, and also has a nice balance of both those employees who are labor organized or not. So that's very important for the state to understand, and to have people working through those issues or questions or doing some research. So thank you for that. So now let's roll into our Commission on Women and what's going on there. We know that there is currently a lawsuit pending. I think it's before the Labor Board, or it may actually be in the court, on the return to work issue. And I know that is right out there. You're familiar with that, right?
The Human Rights Commission has brought a lawsuit, about the sick days and
So we know that, those are legal issues, of course. And, we know that it's not a matter of who's right or wrong. Everything becomes politicized. So right now, what are you familiar with about it? What do you want to talk about regarding what's going on there? What can be done, can't be done? Are you familiar with any negotiations? You might not be, but whatever you're up to date on, if you could share that with us, it would be wonderful.
Yeah. So you're asking specifically about this lawsuit about the use of paid sick days and personal time.
Well, you don't have to
Okay.
narrow it to the lawsuit, but I just know it's out there. So you can just talk about it in general if you like. But if you know anything specific about the status of the lawsuit, it's fine too. I'm going to
Yeah.
let
Okay.
you run with it.
All right. So I don't have any official knowledge about the status of that lawsuit. I have sort of like things that I've heard, but I can't really, speak to that
Sure.
very effectively. Other than the issue is that some of the state employees have in their contract that if they don't use sick time in a certain amount of time in the year, then they get a personal day. So it's like you get additional time off if you don't use your sick time. You get rewarded for not using your sick time, and there are pretty significant equity issues with that. I mean, there's there's kind of the basic one of we do want people to stay home when they're sick, right? We don't really
Right.
want them to
That's a
come into work.
healthy
So
move.
yeah, so we don't really want to encourage that. But then also there are inequitable distributions in who takes sick time to take care of family members, right? So it's more often women who are taking, because their kids are sick, so they're taking time off to take care of their kids, which is part of what you can use
So
the
it's
sick time
who
for.
owns the sickness,
Well, yeah, that's
right? I
one of
mean,
the
pretty
allowable
much.
uses
Yeah.
of sick time
Hmm.
is that if you have a child who's sick, has to go to the doctor or something like that, then you can use your sick leave to take care of that. And so I do believe that that is actually either um, concluded in some way or wrapped up somehow or in the process of being. So this is where I don't know the details and I can't tell you officially,
Sure.
but kind of from what I've heard, I think that is working towards a good resolution. But we will see what happens there. But
Maybe,
then just in
maybe, yeah, I say
oh, go
maybe they're
ahead.
going into the paid time off definitions and expanding what paid time off really means and who
Yeah,
qualifies or how they're dividing it. But they'll come up with negotiations and settlements on different areas, which are fine.
yeah,
But I
yeah,
was just
absolutely.
curious. Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah.
I just was curious.
Well, it just kind of ties into this whole idea of of equity in workplace policies. So when you're looking at making it at rules and policies, and as an employer, it's there can be different outcomes for different populations, whether or not you intended it, right? So the whole idea of the equal pay law that we have on the books now is that you can't pay people differently, of people of different sexes or race or a couple of other categories. You have to be paying them the same for comparable equivalent work. And part of the key is that it doesn't have to be an unintentional disparity. So it's very, it's pretty rare. I can't imagine it generally happens much anymore, but you don't usually have employers saying, well, this is a woman who's in this job and she's not worth as much as a man, so I can pay her less. I mean, that just doesn't really happen. But what can happen is that over time, um, conditions can get set so that you end up with, oh, well, look at that. We have a bunch of engineers working for us. The women are all making less than the men are making because of kind of systemic conditions that have been in place for a while. And so if there's some sort of policy in place that is having an impact on women but not on men, or a negative impact. So for instance, I mean, this policy about using sick time is one of them. So because culturally women are more likely to be the ones who are taking care of the people at home, they're the ones who are more likely to take time off to take their kids to the doctor, and then anything that so any policy needs to recognize that. And so if you're going to reward people for not taking that time off, then you're rewarding, generally speaking, men more than women. So that's an example. So the idea is that there doesn't need to be an intentional disparity. There doesn't need to be a like I'm trying to pay less, but that if conditions come out such that that's what's happening, then it can be a problem. Um,
So you hit it there. You said it's
yeah.
the intent, and the intent is the key right there. And you also brought up an excellent point that it is a systemic cultural move forward because
Hmm.
many women, of course, who started out being, say, home givers, went to school later on,
Right.
went back to work later on under different times and conditions. So their experience gathering in the field specific wasn't as long as their male counterparts.
Hmm.
And also looking at somebody running a household for many years was not looked at as an
Right.
occupational qualifier,
Right.
though there are so many things in there, for going from bookkeeping on up to lay organizing and strategic plans. I mean, I don't know
Right.
anybody who's had a kid who doesn't
Project
have a
management.
strategic plan.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there you go. So that kind of culture is what you are trying to analyze and make sure that there's some equity balance going
Hmm.
forward, correct?
Yeah.
How's
Yeah.
that
And
working for you?
well, I mean, it is slow going, but Vermont is, in terms of some of the laws that we have on the books, Vermont is doing pretty well at trying to address this. I mean, there's larger cultural impacts, but so for instance, you did a great job of kind of talking about how over the years and over the course of a lifetime, we can sort of end up in different places and so end up being compensated differently because of that. And one of the ways that that can kind of get entrenched is when employers base somebody's salary on what they made at their last job. So if I'm an employer and I'm hiring, um, I may say, I'm going to give you, a new person, 5% more than you made at your last job. That's pretty enticing, right? You're going to get more money coming here. But for people who have been always earning a bit less and have been kind of behind the game, which is very often women, then 5% more doesn't necessarily get them up to where they should be or to where that position should actually be paying.
And
And
it could
so
throw them into a tax bracket that takes away more than their 5%.
well, then there, yeah, that's a whole other thing. Yeah. Right, right. That benefits cliff, which affects
Right.
people of all income levels. Yeah. Um, but so it, what we did was we made it illegal to do that, and to inquire about someone's salary history, and with hoping to cut down on the number of that occurrence, because what that can do is just sort of establish, can kind of cement an inequity that may have started years ago, before the person I hired 20 years ago started their career and was earning a little bit less or took time off to have kids and stay home with them for a while, and so they're at a kind of different place, but the actual job that they're doing is worth the pay that it's worth. And so the hope is that that can help kind of interrupt that cycle of perpetuating pay inequities that have gotten established long term. Um, and so now you can't, if you're hiring somebody, you can't ask them what they're currently making or what they made at their last job, and in the hopes that that can kind of break that. And then in combination with another law that Vermont passed very recently, which is that you have to include compensation information in job postings. So you have to be somewhat transparent about how much this job pays. And it can be a range, doesn't have to be an exact amount. So there's still room for negotiation, and you don't have to say exactly how much it is, but to kind of have a sense of, okay, this is a job that pays a, somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 a year, maybe. I mean, that's probably a little bit too big of a range, but as opposed
But
to,
right,
this
I
is a
understand.
job that's like 150 to 200,000, or this is a job that's like a $25,000 a year job. And so that way, when someone's coming in and they want to negotiate, if negotiation is a possibility there, they kind of have a sense of where they are and what the range is. And then it also so it puts people on more of an equal footing with negotiation, makes it a little bit harder to kind of lock in those long patterns of inequity.
So taking that point, let's say I was somebody who was a homemaker and I have equal degrees to anybody. I'm totally qualified for this position. I would have a gap, say, in working specifically in that job arena. Have you found any data or information that shows why women would say, well, I'm not going to apply because this is something that I shouldn't apply for. I'm not really qualified. They assess all of the negativity about the application before they actually apply. Whereas if they applied, they might actually get the job.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
there's that mixed onus. Have you found anything like that?
There is definitely research that supports the idea that men are more likely to just go ahead and apply for the job, even if they don't meet all the qualifications on paper, and that women are more likely to say, well, I need to meet every single one of these specifications, and I don't have exactly this experience or exactly that degree, so I'm not going to apply. And whereas men are more likely to say, well, I'll figure it out. I'll take my chances. I'll go ahead, yeah, and see. And the fact is that it, the skills that people bring to a potential job, a whole wide range of them can actually work, right? You can learn how to do a new particular task, or you can learn the specifics of a new job even if you don't have exactly the right um, the exact same experience that you've always had. And so I think men are more likely to kind of recognize and go, well, I'm gonna be learning anyway. I'll try it. And so we really try to encourage women to just go ahead and apply anyway, even if you're not sure whether you meet all the qualifications or not. Go ahead and apply. We have our newsletter that we send out periodically that includes job notices from nonprofit organizations that we work with. And we always put a note on there saying, remember, even if you think you don't necessarily meet all the qualifications, go ahead and apply, with a link to some research so they can see that it really can help.
So, Carrie, do you also find that it's not so much the qualifications or the fear of not being selected as it is the fear of not having the same level of interviewing skills that the men have because the women have not applied for as many positions. They have not been trained in getting their CVs more specific, in writing cover letters, in actually
Mm-hmm.
getting in there and understanding the questioning. And do you think that that is some type of fear inhibitor as well?
I don't know. I do think that interviewing is a very particular skill that most people don't get very much practice at. I mean, ideally, you don't have to interview for a whole lot of jobs. You get a job and you're good. But it is true that it's a very particular skill, and I think it's challenging for a lot of folks. And I don't know if that's more particular for women or not. I do know that when it comes to negotiating for salary, that women are at a disadvantage there. Um, there's sort of conflicting evidence about whether women do negotiate more or less. But one thing that seems pretty clear is that um, they they tend to not come out with as positive results always, and that they do run a risk of being perceived negatively. So there's kind of a fear, I think, on the part of some women as they go into negotiate, like, well, I want to be agreeable and nice and not rock the boat too much, so I'll just kind of take what they offer or not negotiate too hard because I'm afraid that it will backfire on me, that I'll be viewed negatively, which sounds terrible, right? And it sounds sort of like I'm saying, oh, these women are insecure and they need to have more confidence. But the fact is that they are more likely to be viewed negatively when they negotiate than men are. So they could use the same tactics, but it can be seen as when men do it, it can be seen as confidence and assertiveness and going for what you want. And when women do it, it can be more often seen as pushy, overbearing, kind of a problem. So that's an
Well,
unfortunate thing that I do think is changing pretty significantly in our culture, but it has actually has been true.
so I would think, in general, forgetting whether it's male or female, that in your negotiation for your own salary level, you are actually showing a skill set that would let an employer understand how good you are at
Yep.
negotiating within the position you are
Yeah.
going to be taking and how you view things, fairness, your actual arguments for or against. And that is where I was going kind of with women not having that ability over X amount of years or not understanding that their homemaker skills did include that
Yeah.
negotiations.
Yeah.
Whether it was PTA meetings, whether it was fighting with the principal over your kids' rights, whatever
Yeah.
it was, okay, dealing with your significant other and working out what happened in your day-to-day routines and who's working, who's covering A, B, or C, that those are skills that they have not learned how to incorporate into the resume or the
Mm-hmm.
interview skill set. Are there
Mm-hmm.
resources out there for this type of preparation so that it's not just a blanket, here's my resume, it fits for every single job, as
Yeah.
opposed to those who are more learned on how to interview and know how to adjust their CV without falsifying it, but actually adapting it to specific positions? Are there any resources out there for women?
There are, and particularly focused on negotiating skills, but also on you bring up such a good point about all of the skills that you have to call on to be able to manage a household and run a household. And um,
I would
in the
fail, by the way, on that.
you, yeah, it's a lot of work. When you stop and think about it, what if you had to hire someone to do all of these things? How much that would cost and what kind of skills you'd be looking for. So, everything that you said, right? Being able to manage, a budget, being able to do schedule coordination, being able to understand laws and policies to be able to advocate for your kids and your family members. And there's a whole array of transferable skills. And so that's really the key is it's for anybody actually who's entering the workforce or re-entering or thinking about applying for a job, is to think about what are the transferable skills that they have, so that it may not necessarily be, I didn't work as a as a bookkeeper, but I did use Quicken to manage my family's finances or something like that, which means that I do know something about that, or I have that idea of transferable skills. And so I would recommend, I always recommend this to folks, is that if you went to college, chances are your school had a career development office of some kind. And very, very frequently, they will continue to provide services to alumni to at least a limited degree after you're gone. So it's always worth calling up the career development office at whatever college you went to and just asking if they might take a look at your resume, or talk with you for half an hour and help you kind of think about this kind of stuff. And very often they will do that. And so that's a way to get some expert help pretty
I
easily.
also think that, to me, two very important factors coming out of a homemaker is the trust and loyalty of longevity of
Mm-hmm.
doing that. I mean,
Yeah.
employers want that.
Yeah.
Employers, I mean, I would step back as a potential employer and say, wow, you've done that for 20 years. The only thing I've
Mm-hmm.
done for 20 years is live. I
Yeah.
mean, seriously, like
Yeah.
that is amazing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? And then the dependency on that person. I mean, that's your team player.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so that type of leadership and skill set is something that should not be suppressed. It shouldn't be,
Right.
oh, I've done this for 20 years. I didn't do anything else. I mean, that's what I mean, that analyzing the skills
Yeah.
and the
Hmm.
loyalty, or that's what employers want. I mean, they
Hmm.
want to
Hmm.
see that somebody, if something is tough, they're not going to quit.
Right. Yeah,
And
exactly.
so I'm curious as to what data's out there, or any interviews with, women who have turned around and said, I didn't say this because I thought it would be negatively, viewed,
Oh,
as
yeah.
opposed
Yeah.
as opposed to finding, the positive sale on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And not
Yeah.
sale in a superficial way, but
No,
as a
exactly.
true
Hmm.
skill. So I'm
Hmm.
really curious about that. Tell me more about the areas now. We're coming into the legislature, the areas of the Women Commission and what they're looking at. Like policy wise, we've had some policy meetings. Like what is out there that's top priority? I know the women issues in prison.
Yep. Hmm.
So can you kind of fill
Yep.
us in on that?
Sure. Yeah. So our kind of overall focus this year in particular is workplace equity and security. And not that we don't focus on that all the time, but that's one that's kind of that's sort of guiding us. And so we've been collaborating with the Vermont Women's Fund and with Vermont Works for Women on some data collection and reporting. So they just released, Vermont Works for Women is the lead organization on this, and came out with a report called Women, Work, and Wages. And it's a spotlight report. It has just a few pieces of data, but about the women's workforce data. So things like the percentage of women who are working full-time versus part-time, information about the wage gap, how much people are earning, looking at different education levels. And so there's going to be a much longer report coming out of that over the next year as we get more data. But one of the things that can help inform is, where are these gaps? What do we still need to be doing to kind of make things more equitable? One of the things that we're learning is that women are actually starting to leave the workforce again. There was a long trend, from the 60s on up, that more and more women were entering the workforce. That just recently is starting to come down again, and we're not 100% sure why that is. It does seem like COVID really threw everybody for a loop, and there were
Yeah,
folks like,
COVID changed
yeah,
the whole dynamic for, yeah,
yeah,
for
yeah.
everybody.
It really did. And so we're trying to look at what are the things that can help women stay in the workforce, get paid what they get paid equitably, and be able to also care for their families at the same time. So paid leave is a big one, that you need to be able to take time off if you have a baby, or if you are sick, or you have a family member who has cancer or something. You need to be able to take some time off from your job without losing all the income from your job. There are folks who are making the choice between, am I going to stay home and take care of this sick family member, or am I going to go to work? And I have to go to work because I don't have any other source of income. And so paid family and medical leave is a huge one that we don't have guaranteed in Vermont, and that we really need. And that's been a top priority of ours for a long time. But then also looking at
Doesn't the administration, though, in the state side, there is a paid family leave
the
policy
state
already in
employees.
place?
Yes,
That's
state
correct.
employees have that as a benefit, and then other
And
employers
isn't there an
provide it as a
opt-in?
benefit.
Is there an
Mhm.
opt-in part to that as well, correct?
There is insurance that
Mhm.
employers can buy that covers uh, family and medical leave. So just like with short-term disability insurance or
Mhm.
other kinds of insurance like that, employers can choose to buy that if they want to, and then provide that as a benefit to their employees. So we have it is possible for employers to decide they're going to provide that as a benefit, and some employers do and some don't. Not very many do, and a lot of them find that it's not really cost effective. It's costs a lot of money. It's, you know, they can't necessarily afford it. Also, when only the people who are opting into it, uh, when those are, it's more often the people who opt into it are the ones who know that they're going to need to use it. It's like when the employees, if say they would like this benefit, that it's because they know I'm going to be having a baby in the next couple of years, and so it makes the price of that insurance much higher when most of the people who are in that insurance program are ones who are taking the benefits. And so it's a fairly costly insurance benefit for employers. So to make it more cost effective, um, and to make sure that everybody gets covered, a broad universal coverage program is much more effective. Gets every employee gets covered that way, and the cost of it is lower for everybody. So that's
But
one
I
of the
think
things
if
we're
I'm,
going to be
and
looking
I
at.
could be mistaken on this, I think the main debate is really over whether it is mandatory or voluntary, not the
Yep,
broadness of the coverage, but whether it is mandatory or involuntary for those specific businesses, which is always where
exactly.
regulation comes in and it's
Yep,
always an issue. And,
yep,
and you know,
exactly.
debates on both, good arguments on both
Mhm,
sides.
mhm,
So,
mhm,
and that's where
mhm.
it becomes a little bit politicized. But the bottom line is I think they will figure it out. I think they're getting closer and closer. But you brought up the Women's Fund, and you brought up Works for Women, I believe it was.
Vermont Works for Women. Yep. Mhm.
Right. And so, can you tell us a little bit about what each organization does? I know they're partners with the commission, which doesn't mean
Yes.
that they direct the commission. It means that they
No.
come in and ask questions, we get advice, share resources. But we're
Mhm.
just, and you know, the Commission on Women is a distinct agency.
Right.
But could you tell us a little bit about those organizations so we know what it is they do and what they offer?
Sure. Yeah. So they are both organizations that are members of our Vermont Commission on Women Advisory Council, which is made up of a bunch of different organizations that share our mission. So we've been partners with those organizations in some way for many, many years. And then about 10 years ago or so, the three organizations teamed up to create the Change the Story initiative, which was a kind of longer term systemic approach to trying to improve women's economic status in Vermont. So, Vermont Women's Fund is a philanthropic organization. They kind of under the umbrella of the Vermont Community Foundation, but they're their own fund, and they do grant making to nonprofits who are focusing on education and programming that are, improving life for women. And so they've been around for maybe 25 years, something like that. And they bring that kind of private sector philanthropy to the table. And then Vermont Works for Women is a nonprofit organization that's been around since the 80s, doing training and education and workforce development for women, particularly in non-traditional fields. And so they have had a whole lot of different approaches to this. They have training programs, they have pre-apprenticeship programs. They do work with girls, with young people, to try to increase the number of women who are in non-traditional fields that pay more, but also just to increase women's ability to be able to make more money for themselves and for their family and have economic security.
Aren't they the organization that put together the program where younger women and girls were going into the aerospace
They did
industry?
have they did have a program at one point. I forget what it was called, but it was focused on aviation. Yes, and it was for girls, so that I think it was like a summer camp
Phenomenal
or
area.
after school or something. Yeah, yeah,
That is an area that should not be discarded.
yeah.
I mean, I know, but I was like the CEO of an international airline and airline parts company, and I understand the opportunities there.
Yeah.
And boy, that is an area that women do want to get into.
Oh
And there's
yeah.
so many
Yeah.
opportunities. So I would hope that they continue with that program because
Yeah.
I mean, from sales of parts to, I mean, to actually going hands-on and building and engineering, and those are fantastic. Even behind the scenes in the administrative side, and
Mhm.
it's international. I mean, there's so many opportunities, even to being pilots. So there are so many opportunities there for not only women but everybody, but a great door opportunity for
Yeah.
women and girls. And I would think also taking a program like that, and it doesn't have to be limited to aviation, though I totally think it's a great opportunity. They work with the training centers. I would think at the high schools is another way to opt in.
Yes.
So, right. So, do these organizations actually do that? Do they work with the training centers over at the different high schools or distinct training centers for those who say don't want to attend college right away or want to do it simultaneously with learning a trade? How do
Yeah,
those programs
absolutely.
work?
Yeah, so they do work with the career and technical education, with the career centers in the state, and that has been true for a very long time, and it's taken different forms. They came up with a program called Women Can Do, which is a one-day conference for girls from around the state. They come to Vermont State University, Vermont Technical College campus for a day, and they get to do like lots of hands-on stuff. They operate large equipment, and they, car repair and all kinds of trades and technology sort of things. And then they also work. That organization works with the tech centers directly to help them think about what kind of equity programs they might want to have, or how to increase the number of girls in some of these non-traditional roles like construction. There tend not to be a lot of girls enrolling in that program. Um, and so their focus is really on how can we make sure that everybody knows what opportunities are available to them, and that they make their decisions about what kind of education to pursue, what kind of training to get, what kind of jobs to get. They make those decisions based on interest and and motivation, and not on what they think girls are supposed to do or boys are supposed to do. So the idea is to really get rid of those limitations and say, maybe you don't want to be a car mechanic, but if you don't want to be a car mechanic, it shouldn't be because you think that girls shouldn't do that or can't do that. You know, it should be because you've assessed it and you decided that's not for me. And then maybe you have a chance to try it out and you realize I might actually like this. I've never tried it before, but I might like it. So
Yeah, no, I mean the opportunities are phenomenal, and it's the
yeah,
lack of knowledge about the different industries that's not available to many that actually stops those job openings and people applying, women applying.
yeah.
So in the Women's Commission, we're thinking about CEDA, right? Our
Hmm.
favorite, right? Can
Yeah,
you tell us a little about that international program and what that's all about? I know
sure.
Marilyn, our new commissioner, is going to be a
Yeah,
champion of that.
yeah. So it's a program called Cities for CEDAW, and CEDAW is an acronym that stands for, I think it's the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And this is something that comes out of the United Nations. And it's kind of a set of conditions that almost every country in the world has kind of signed on to say, yes, we want to work towards eliminating this discrimination against women. The United States has never signed on to it as a country, but through this program, Cities for CEDAW, it's a way for municipalities or counties to say, we're going to sign on to this and we're going to take some action to try to make things more equitable in terms of gender equity under our purview. So we've been talking. You and I have had some good meetings, and Madeline Mata, who's another one of our commissioners who recently came on, has been working on this. The League of Women Voters is very active with this initiative, and it would be great. I'm really hoping that we might be able to support some municipality in Vermont to sign on to this and take a little bit of action. Can be very, doesn't have to be, overhauling everything. Can be something as simple as identifying certain goals for recruitment or something like that, or doing a pay equity audit. We have a toolkit that was developed in the Change the Story initiative that employers can use to audit themselves and figure out if they have any pay inequities and where they're coming from and what they need to do about that. So that's just, for instance, a town could say, we're going to do that pay equity audit, and we're also going to kind of officially sign on and say we support this goal of eliminating all forms of discrimination against women. So I'm very hopeful to see
And
more about that.
the former president of the council of Newport was in favor of this.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a new council now, but I'm just saying there was the president was definitely in favor of this and pursuing it. So I just think it's not as well known across the state of Vermont and
It's
what
really
it is.
not.
And it's a matter of getting appropriate information out there and education on what it means and the different tools that they can do. So, Cary, can you talk about now what you'd like to talk about? I've been I apologize, directing it to certain areas that I really wanted the public to know about. But we've got a legislative session coming up. Talk to us.
Yeah.
It's yours.
Well, I want to talk about all of this stuff. And so there's, everything that you brought up is really great. I don't know what this legislative session is going to be like. Every year, it seems like we go into this and people say, this is going to be one of the hardest ones ever because of finances. And I think that's always true. So it's always challenging to figure out, the balance between revenue and providing services. So that will be taking up a lot of people's energy, but we're trying to think about, are there recommendations that we can make, or are there bills that we can recommend, whether it's for this year or for coming up in the future, that are things that can support women in the workplace primarily without looking for a big appropriation or having to spend a lot of money. So for instance, one of the laws that we have on the books is a right to request flexible working arrangements. And that's been true since 2013, I think that passed. And we've been talking in our policy committee about whether that needs to have a little bit of strengthening, or whether we need to look a little bit more carefully at, well, what does that actually mean? Because right now it's just, you have the right to ask, and you can't be, that your employer can't have a policy that says you're not allowed to even bring this up. But it could be a little bit stronger in that maybe your employer might have to have a verifiable, bona fide business-related reason to say no, or, and we haven't gotten into what specifically that might look like. But it ties into questions that are coming up around remote work and around telework, and going back to that Governor's Workforce Equity and Diversity Council that I'm part of, looking at the state employees who have recently, as of December 1st, everybody was told that they have to work in the office at least 3 days a week, whereas a lot of folks had been working since COVID, had started working remotely more than that, or sometimes entirely. And it's a really dramatic change to the working conditions for one of the largest employers in the state. And so it's been getting a lot of attention, and it brings up questions about what are helpful things to have in the workplace that help people stay at work. And this ties into what I mentioned earlier about, we're seeing more women leaving the workforce than we were, and the workforce participation rate going down. And it seems very likely that a lot of it is tied to mandates to work in the office all the time, or to take away that remote work opportunity, because that has been very, very beneficial for people who are trying to take care of family members and work, and people who have health conditions, people who have disabilities. There's a whole lot of equity issues there. So that's kind of there isn't a specific bill that we have come up with or that we're trying to support, but this is part of where our conversations in the policy committee have been going, is looking at are there ways that we can support people in having flexibility at work, in having predictable work schedules. That's another one. So, a lot of times if you work at a restaurant or retail, you might not know your work schedule very far ahead of time. It may change every 2 weeks. Having some predictability there, having some, under some kind of protections about whether you could work flexibly or request it, but something stronger than that. These are all kind of tied together. So I'm being a little bit vague because it's unclear
Sure.
exactly how this will all work together. But these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. Are there, and that don't require the state to come up with money. So
Yeah.
that's
So
a big part of it.
on what you've just said, this, a force, hey, I want everybody to come back to work. That's a very typical management tool as well, because if you throw that out there at some at will work, employees, you're asking them, hey, if you don't want the job, quit. And that's a good way to get people to quit so you don't have to fire them. But not that it's being done for that purpose. But I'm curious to know, do we have any data to see if a lot of people have decided to not return to work because of this request? And also, why 3 days? Why not 4? Why not 2? Why 3?
Why not do? Yeah.
Do we know anything about
I
that?
um I think that the administration was trying to come up with a compromise between letting people set, between they wanted some kind of consistency. I think, I can't really speak for them, but I think that
Sure.
3 days was as opposed to 5,
So was that
trying
already
to
part
give a
of
little.
the when they were discussing these issues prior to a lawsuit? Is that where it was? They said, okay, 3, or do you not even know? Well, you might not even know that. You might not be privy to that. I was just curious as to when the announcement came out and it was 3 days, why not either full time or not? And do we know if any daycare facilities were offered to any of the people who are now being told to come on back? So I know we're not privy to the negotiations, but I didn't know if any of this was public. I haven't had the opportunity to research or start my questions on it. I didn't know if any of the other organizations knew any of this and you had any information on it.
Yeah. I don't really know. I do know that the administration made this decision and then sought feedback through the form of surveys from state employees. And I don't know how their findings in that survey affected the final form of this, whether it's 3 days or 4 days or 5 days. I don't know if the feedback from the employees had anything to do with that. And I know that the state employees union brought a lawsuit because they were seeing that people's working conditions were being changed,
Yeah, my
just across the
understanding from the
board.
lawsuit, and I really am not, haven't really read it over and over again, I just glimpsed at it, was that at first their injunction request was denied because they didn't prove the harm level.
Mm-hmm.
But I think now
Mm-hmm.
they've gone and enhanced the lawsuit or filed it in a different venue. And please, I'm not
Yeah.
actually sure. But I think at first the
Yeah.
injunction they sought was denied because the judge thought they hadn't shown harm, the level of harm necessary. But
Mm-hmm.
well, I
Yeah.
will look into it
I am
more.
not. Yeah. I'm not sure of the details of that. I can't speak very effectively to that, what exactly happening with that lawsuit. But I do know that there are conversations about the contract negotiations, and is this, because it's is it part of the contract, or should it be something that is available to employees? And I mean, it was something that was available to employees before by policy, and then they people had telework arrangements in place. They had agreements. They had gone through the official state process of creating telework agreements that existed prior to this, and those were all just thrown out across the board, and everybody had to start over.
I'm curious
And
to
so,
know if you, going forward, if we can get some information on for those
right.
people who decided not to go back to work or leave their jobs because of this mandate. Were there more women who didn't go back, or more men?
Yeah. And that is exactly what we don't know yet, and what we need to know, and what we're hoping to be able to ask for. Because anecdotally, we heard from a lot of state employees who were saying that this was going to be a problem for them, and they might not be able to do it, and so they might have to leave. And we know that there are disparities between how this requirement to work in the office affects different groups of people. As I said, people who are caregivers, people who have health conditions, people with disabilities. And so what we don't know is what the impact of that will be. And that is what I'm hoping that we'll be able to find out from the state, is what has been the fallout from this. If there has been, are there people who have left their jobs completely? And if so, is it more women? Is it more people of color? Is it more people with disabilities? What is it? I don't know if we're going to be able to get that specific data, but we're going to try. And then hopefully be able to look at how that compares nationally, where we're starting to see what looks like it might be a trend of women leaving when they lose access to remote work. This is all still, very early days with this kind of thing, but this is exactly the data that we need, and these are the questions that we need answered.
I would be curious as well. It's my understanding that Waterbury is an area where they're making sure that people will have access to work. Are there any other areas across the state where they are setting up return to work centers, or are they just focusing in the Montpelier, Waterbury area, up in that area? Or are they going south as well, saying, okay, we have people across the state who have to drive across the state. Are we going to set up sections of, come on back to work, but we will have the appropriate operational level done across the state to help alleviate some of the burdens there?
So you had mentioned something about childcare before,
Right.
and so the state doesn't provide childcare, never has, as far as I know. But one of the things that they have done is provide what they call a resource page. There's a section of the website for employees to go and to. The idea is that they can get information about how to get childcare, but there isn't really anything there that's new or different. That we have a huge shortage of childcare opportunities in the state, and it's not necessarily affordable for a lot of people. But just so I don't think the state has anything to offer beyond what was already out there. I mean, the limitations of childcare in Vermont are what they are.
Right.
And so that is one of the things that state employees are definitely facing. Yeah.
So, why Waterbury? Why must everybody go to work up there? Why do you believe that that's the area that everybody across the state of Vermont who works for the state should travel to? I mean, I'm not you.
So
Why do
that's
you believe it? But
yeah.
I'm saying in
Yeah, no,
general,
I know.
why not
um,
Rutland?
well, the state invested a lot in offices in
Mhm.
Waterbury. There's a state office complex
Yeah, and that's
there.
what the information I want
And
is so that people are not
yep,
saying, "Well, why Waterbury?" I mean, there's a reason. So,
yeah, exactly. And so also they consolidated with the the increase of people doing remote work, they consolidated some of their overall office space around the state. So very specifically, there was a building in Burlington that housed Department of Health employees, and they closed that building down. I think there were health considerations that I'm not sure, but anyway, it was a lot of offices that after the pandemic, when more and more people were working remotely, they said, okay, we can do this. We'll close this office, and people can continue to work remotely, or they can change their work schedules, and their office will be moved to Waterbury officially, because that's where we already have some office space. But there weren't enough offices in Waterbury to accommodate all of those people who had been working at that building in Burlington. And so this was done knowing that lots of those people would be working remotely, and it wasn't necessary to provide office space for everybody in Waterbury. And so you ended up with a whole lot of people whose kind of official workstation was supposedly in Waterbury, but they didn't actually have one because there weren't enough for all the people who would have been working there, because they were counting on people being able to work remotely. So that's why now there's kind of the scramble to, well, where's everybody going to go if they have to come back to the office 3 days a week? But we got rid of a bunch of our offices in Burlington, and so now they're trying to. So I don't know, that why not increase the space in Burlington again? I don't know the logistics of that. I think that they're kind of sorting that out.
And I'm sure BGS is involved in all of that analysis as well.
Yeah.
And so I was just curious, I know that I've heard from people outside who say, well, why Waterbury, blah, blah. And I didn't have the answer. I could figure it out, but I didn't. I wanted to demystify, the infamous myths out there, and so I thought it would help. So talk to me more. This is your last several. I think we've got maybe 5 minutes left. It's all yours.
Okay. So I think just keeping with our theme of women's economic equity and security, that we really need to be paying really close attention to what is actually going on economically for women in Vermont. And so this Women Work and Wages Spotlight data report that we just worked with Vermont Works for Women and the Vermont Women's Fund on is really important. It's going to help us to look back on data that we gathered before during the Change the Story initiative over multiple years, and to kind of compare and see how we're doing, and really keep that focus on the fact that we continue to see these disparities. We continue to see that overall women are making less money than men are, which has a huge impact on not just those individuals, but on our whole economy, because people are having disparities in how they support their families. And then another thing that I really want to make sure we keep talking about goes back to what you were saying earlier about women who've been homemakers and have been running a home and a family for years, and how valuable those skills are, yes, in terms of future employment, and also the economic value that labor is providing to all the rest of us. And so, we tend to think of taking care of your kids and taking care of your home as just something that you're just kind of supposed to do, which, yes, you are. And the fact is, if you didn't do it, somebody would have to do it. And so you have to pay someone. So if you have to go to work and you can't take care of your own children during the day, you pay somebody for childcare. And so there is an economic value to that. Right now, so much of that is being provided for free, and or for very low compensation. And our whole economy is dependent on somebody taking care of the kids and the old folks and the sick people. Those folks, that caregiving has to happen. And right now, so much of it is happening by people who aren't being paid at all or aren't being paid adequately. And so that's another thing that we really kind of have to factor in when we're thinking about women's economic security and how it affects our entire economy and all of us. None of this would work if we didn't have somebody providing that care to their family members and to people who need care. And the fact is that we would have to pay for it, and it would be pretty expensive if we didn't have people doing it for free. And that's not very
Yeah,
equitable.
no,
So
right. And
that
also
is
that is
constant
influenced
challenge.
as well.
Yeah.
It's the sandwich generation, right? And so that,
Oh, well,
right.
yeah.
But the thing is
Yeah.
that age bracket is morphing. Um, Women are having children at an older age. And then the
Hmm.
parents are in need, grandparents and great grandparents are in need of assistance. So sometimes you have women who were strong in the workforce, stepping back, having
Hmm.
children, and then wanting to go
Hmm.
back into the workforce and being forced, whether choice or whatever it is, because of their kindness and they're nice people and they want to take care of the older generation. And so there's a whole morph of the culture going on, so
Yeah.
we need to pay attention to all of that whole benefit, cost benefit relationship and how it affects the women.
Yeah.
So, as always, you are one of my favorite people to have on this show. You're just a wealth of knowledge and information. And I'm going to beg you to come back on. Um,
Anytime.
so, on that note, this has been Cary Brown, who is the executive director of the Commission on Women, such a valuable person for the state of Vermont. And I thank you, Cary. And this has been Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan. And we will see you next week. Thank you.